What really happened that February night in 2020, the night that Sarah Boone murdered George Torres? There seem to be two main theories, schools of thought, and I think they're both viable. We will discuss those and their variations, but first, let's talk about what we know. What we know from evidence, what we know from reliable witnesses, and what we know from what we learned about Sarah Boone and George Torres and their relationship. The night of February 23rd, 2020, George Torres sustained injuries that the medical examiner said may have been caused by a beating or a struggle. Some kind of assault took place. It is believed that George had been dead for about 11 hours before the medics arrived, which would put his time of death at approximately midnight. We know that Juan, George's brother, spoke to him at 7:30 that night. And at that time, he observed he heard that Sarah was already berating George and telling him to get off the phone and citing all of the times that he has been choking her. This is her go-to drunken gripe. It is also a completely false narrative that she insists on continuing to this day. The next door neighbors heard fighting starting at about 9 o'clock or 9:30, which was the norm. At around 10:30 or 11 o'clock, they heard a very loud boom, and a very loud boom that sounded like it started from the top of Sarah's townhome to the bottom, so the stairs. As I said, that was at about 10:30, 11 o'clock. After that, they heard silence, nothing but silence, followed by a brief shuffling. The other evidence that we have is the videos that Sarah took. One was at 11:12 p.m. and the next was at 11:23 p.m. In them, she is very drunk and she is taunting George because he can't breathe, and she's cursing at him and berating him. She's not making any efforts to let him out of his predicament. Not only that, but she is making it very clear that she's not about to do that. About 23 minutes later, she calls her ex-husband, Brian. He does not remember this call. He wasn't really paying attention. She was drunk and he hung up. So this is what we have. Along with what we know about the relationship, what we've seen in Sarah's home videos. And what we've seen in her home videos is that Sarah gets drunk. She becomes very angry at George for things that we have no proof actually happened. And George generally is, well, not generally, always is appeasing her. He's trying to apologize. He is trying to make the situation better. He never strikes her. He never yells at her. He never seems to get angry. So here are the theories, the most common theories. There are two main theories that I have seen people working with and that I've also thought of myself. And within those two theories, there are variables of them. The first theory is that George was packing to leave Sarah, which would explain her rage and the suitcase. I find this to be the least viable because I don't see George taking such a rebellious stance. I don't think it would be safe for him, and I think he knows that. I think it's unusual for anyone in that kind of, as the victim of that kind of abuse, to take that kind of action because it's dangerous and it's not going to go well. So I don't think that's how that particular scenario took place. I do, however, think that it is possible that Sarah took the suitcase out because, just in case we have to say this, there was no hide and seek. Just the end. That suitcase was all the way in the back of the closet, like Sarah said it was. You know, there was no giving away clothes or cleaning the closet because she was sick of looking at her son's clothes. None of that. So, but obviously the suitcase came out at some point. Now, As far as George leaving Sarah, I think the more plausible scenario around that theory is that Sarah took out the suitcase and she told him to pack his shit and leave. And George, who normally would start apologizing and begging her not to do this and telling her he loves her, had finally, maybe, possibly, reached his limit and said, okay, good. And he started packing his things to leave. That is not going to go over well. So I think one of two things probably happened there. Maybe three things. Sarah became very angry at this point and she started beating him with the bat. She pushed him down the stairs and she thought that he was dead because he fell unconscious. I don't know if she knocked him on the head with the bat or if he banged his head falling down the stairs, but I would imagine that that bump on his head is what caused him to be knocked unconscious. She was extremely drunk, and as we know, she gets blackout drunk. Now, I've never been blackout drunk, but I know people who have, and from what they say, you really have no recollection of the night before. You kind of have to put it together with whatever clues you can find. I've been drunk, though, and I've been drunk and angry one or two times, and that kind of thinking is not logical, and it's disconnected. It's one thought, one idea to the next, one action to the next, and it's not a cohesive program you're putting together for yourself or anyone else. So my guess is that she thought George was dead, and she, using her drunkard crackhead strength, put him in the suitcase and zipped it up. Now let's get to the other possibility, and then we'll get to the video, what happened there. The other possibility is that they were fighting, clearly. She started to beat him with the bat, which it's possible she's done that before. We don't know. That bat certainly was in play a lot and mentioned on several of the body cams, so it was on her mind for sure. And I believe she claimed at one point in one of the body cams to say that she slept with it to protect herself or something like that. I believe they were fighting. I believe she beat him with the bat. I believe she threw him down the stairs. And like in the other scenario, she either knocked him unconscious with the bat or he fell unconscious during the fall down the stairs, at which point she thought that he was dead. She may have just thought he passed out. I don't know. But again, used her drunkard crackhead strength to put him in the suitcase and zip it up. Now at this time, so we're at the same state of events for either scenario. He's in the suitcase. It's also possible that she beat him into the suitcase, but it is possible, but I somehow think that he was passed out before that video started. I think that she was sitting in the living room, enjoying the fact that she did not have to share the rest of the Woodbridge with anyone, and basking in her drunken glory. She really thought she had done something there. Whether or not she thought he was dead, I don't think that was really preoccupying her. I think that she had just put him in there and was really thrilled with herself. She was sitting there drinking her Woodbridge, and he came too. And that's when Sarah started filming, because that's what Sarah loves to do. And in Sarah's mind, this was going to be just like all of the other videos of her torturing George. This was going to be proof that he was abusive. Because in the video, she says, "This is how I feel when you choke me. This is how I feel when you cheat on me." And to Sarah, that is proof positive that he has choked her and cheated on her. When she heard George's voice coming from the suitcase, she was not relieved because he's obviously alive. She probably had forgotten by then that she even had thought he was dead. She immediately switched into the next mode, which was torture and film. She was, if anything, she was thrilled because she had a little more time to torture him. A little more interaction there. All the while being able to drink the rest of the wine alone, because I think that's really pretty important to her, as we've seen from the video where she's berating him for drinking the vodka. Now, we don't know what went on after she stopped recording the video in those 20 or so minutes. My guess is a little more of that, a little more of you should shut the F up. And she eventually went upstairs to call Brian. Now, at this point, I would imagine that since George did not live much longer than this, according to the medical examiner, he was probably already had fallen silent. Perfect time for Sarah to go make a call because Sarah does not like to be sitting around without a peep, as we know. So she went upstairs to call Brian, as she does in these situations. She's always trying to flee to his house for whatever the reason is. And I would just like to say that one of the many, many, many things that show how full of lies Sarah's stories are is that if George were jealous, if he were possessive, if he were a belligerent drunk, Sarah would not be able to flee to Brian's house without George showing up there not long after. There is no way that an abusive, jealous, drunk spouse, partner, is not going to follow you to wherever you flee, particularly if it is your ex's house. Had he had these qualities, every time that she would flee to Brian's house, he would show up with that bat. He never did. She would flee there. She would, I'm sure, go over her usual narrative, ruin everyone's night over there, and then pass out. And I think that had Brian still been falling for this, because he had told the detectives about this and that he had stopped allowing it because he realized that, he stopped believing her. And he said that one of the last times that, or last few times or whatever, I think he's the last, a particular time that he said, that he cited, that she had called and wanted to flee. She was scared and he just didn't believe her and he said no. And she, the next day, had forgotten all about it. She was fine. They were fine. So I think that what would have happened this night if Brian had let her come over is she would have gone over. By now, I think she's long forgotten everything that transpired there. She would have gone to Brian's. Why she does that, I don't know. I think she feels she's teaching George a lesson. I think that she feels that she's showing him. So she goes to Brian. She thinks that he's, going to be upset or miss her. Or, she's got this drunk bravado nonsense going on where she thinks she's really making a point. I mean, she's that way sober on the stand, too. So she would have gone to Brian's. She would have passed out eventually. She would have woken up the next day and gone back to her townhome and found the suitcase and, all forgotten about the video still. The rest wouldn't have been all that different. Then she passed out, or as she would say it, fell asleep or hit the bed. I don't think that it was intentional. I don't think that she had her compos mentis enough to know that he was going to die. But I personally feel that it is much worse that she just didn't care. She just didn't think about it. She was that drunk. She's that stupid. And she's that cruel. That George's life meant so little to her that she wasn't purposely trying to snuff it out or keep him alive. He just happened to die. I believe that the next morning she woke up not that much earlier than she said, and maybe not earlier at all. I don't think there was a lot of setup or planning. I think that I think that the puzzle and the paintings were already done by George and her son in the weeks before. So they were already in place for the backdrop of the story that she came up with. Now, the story had to involve the suitcase because she couldn't take him out of the suitcase. This much she knew. Because then how would she explain any of that? That he was dead, that he is asphyxiated, I think she knows enough to know that a medical examiner might know that he was in a confined space. So she had to explain the suitcase. She had to leave him in the suitcase, or at least leave the suitcase in the scenario and explain that. And she came up with the hide and seek idea, which is probably the only. I mean, I wouldn't have. If I had to explain this somehow, I may have used the hide and seek, but I wouldn't have done it the way she did, certainly. All of the possible scenarios that you can come up with to excuse why the man was in a suitcase are ridiculous, but they didn't have to be as ridiculous as tag and seek. So this was the story that she came up with. She was ready with it on the 911. The second that the dispatch answers the phone, she's screaming that they were playing. She doesn't know what happened. Maybe he had an aneurysm. She doesn't think he suffocated, though. That seems highly implausible. So they come, and we know the rest. I don't think that she was consciously trying to get Brian to help her with the body. I'm sure that she did, however, say, "What are we going to do about this?" as one of you suggested, and I agree. And Brian is no idiot, so he walked in there, saw what was going on there, and did a quick U-turn out. He told her to call 911 for the third, fourth, fifth time. I don't know. She just didn't want to be alone for this because she's a coward and, a horrible person. So there's that. Also, to be clear, had George not died that night, no matter what ended up, if the outcome were different, Sarah would still not have gotten her son from school that day. As history has shown us, Sarah was truant in that regard time and time again. And that's because Sarah, as we've seen also in the body cams and her own videos, Sarah gets so drunk that the next day she is in no condition to do anything except for get drunk again. And Sarah does what Sarah wants to do, which is get drunk. So for all of her embarrassing and ridiculous carrying on about how she was preparing the townhome because her son was coming the next day, which is not completely ridiculous anyway. Any parent who has a child who has shared custody knows that is just de rigueur. That's part of you don't have to set up the home for your son to come. He's there every week. She didn't want to leave again because her son was coming the next day. This is all such bullshit that it is just mind-blowing. But either way, Sarah was not going to pick up her son the next day. That's for sure. It's not George's death at her hands that stopped that from happening. Sarah loved drinking and she loved playing the role of the victim. For whatever reason, she had made that her niche. This lifestyle that she had created fed her endlessly dramatic and pious image of herself as a victim. It fed her ego and helped her convince herself that she is not as horrible as she actually is and was. The more horrible she became, the more drunk she was, the more she peed in her call 911 shorts, the nastier she was to George, the longer she went without working, the more neglectful she was of her parental custodial responsibilities, the more nasty texts she sent to George's family, the more she needed this fault pageantry, the more she needed to blame everyone and anyone but herself. It is my belief that had Sarah not been charged with George's murder, she would have eventually, and in short order, filled that role with her son. He would have become the cause of her shortcomings, because it certainly wasn't her. I believe that she would have come to abuse him, and as I said, blame him for all of her shortcomings, and this would have become a pattern that I don't think is that unusual, unfortunately. What I don't understand, the one thing that I can't piece together is that one time that Brian had said that at the time that George was incarcerated in jail for about 3 weeks, that Sarah was diligent with her parental responsibilities. And if it was anyone other than Sarah, I would say it's because she had taken a look at herself and she was trying to improve. But there's no reason. This is such an isolated incident, which is why it always stuck out to me and it confuses me a little bit, because this is just not Sarah's way. Sarah is not trying to improve herself. Clearly, she's had 5 years of sobriety now behind bars, and she's worse. And her son certainly had become more of a priority to her. So I believe that what happened there is that she was so angry. George would be my guess. Would he had made a comment about her value as a mother or her lack of parental efficacy, let's say. And she had something to prove. That's the only way that I can put it in Sarah's world and make it make sense. This is also an example of how disjointed and faulty the defense was. Not the defense attorney necessarily, but the defense that Sarah insisted upon using. However, they still could have cited this as a time when Sarah was, and the only time when she was, a decent parent, was the 3 weeks that George was not there. This is an argument, the only argument that they could have had, really, to show that Sarah had any value as a mother and that George had any negative impact on that. Now, it's possible that they didn't use it because there was a lot of other evidence to argue against it or to show why this happened and to really just disprove it altogether. But they did not use it. They were too busy reading books about battered spouse syndrome and trying to create a false defense. What I really don't understand, much like many of the choices that Sarah made, is why she felt the need to posture herself as a victim, but also as the stringent drill sergeant of George. She wanted to portray herself as being terrified of George all the time, yet also being his counselor, a very unlikable counselor, I might add. She can't give up any of her delusional self-image. She has to be the one who always knows what to do and how to do it, and she also has to be the terrified victim. This makes her look competent and together and intelligent in her mind, and also the put upon, always the victim, always the martyr, always the survivor. She needs it all. She has to have it all, and none of it is true. She would not deviate from this role. During the interrogation, on the stand, she insisted on being the stone cold sober boss of George, as well as the long time victim of George. The overwhelming and overarching theme of Sarah's life over the last few years, 24/7, was this obsession and preoccupation with punishing George. This was her raison d'etre, her reason for life, her reason for being. She punished George for her own insecurity, for her own shortcomings. And as she punished George, she placed herself under the halo of a perpetual victim. She sees victimhood as a shield from all fault. And we all know that Sarah has no fault. She does not do anything wrong, ever. Human beings are generally forgiving when someone has been victimized. And she does not hold herself accountable for anything at all. Possibly Sarah's most terrifying quality is her lack of self-reflection and her inability to look within. I suppose that she convinced herself, only herself, with her lies and her false narrative. And as we see, that is a very slippery slope. But for Sarah, it was better than facing any of the truth. She just could not admit having any fault, making any mistakes. And again, I think that is a very dangerous person. Let me know if you have any theories, what you think of those, what you think of maybe those, but with slightly different themes around them or slightly different angles. Thank you for watching, and I will talk to you soon. Bye. So the what really happened that night video generated a lot of viewer opinions on what really happened that night, and they're great. So I thought, let's go over them for a few reasons. One, I love the idea. And two, it really, I mean, I didn't say this in the video but that I made, but that was just kind of my general idea of what the basic pieces that I thought had happened. But I have a very open mind, and some of you made suggested something that I definitely think is true that I don't think I had ever even considered. And there are just some other things that differ from me that I think are really good, probably true also, and things that I had kind of like considered, but for whatever reason abandoned or whatever. So we're gonna do that. It might take a long time. I might split it into two. I don't know. We're gonna see. We're gonna see. I like long videos, and I think a lot of people do. I don't know. I like to sleep to videos about murder because something wrong with me. And Forensic Files is like a lullaby to me. So let's start with this one. They're not really in any specific order. I'm doing them. Okay, this is from Hyperdog67. I've got a theory I'd like to share, and I'd like to see who agrees with me. Okay, let's go. I don't believe for 1 minute that Sarah went upstairs and fell asleep. I believe she passed out right there in front of him. Listen to her speech and her slurring words, not making sense while she's taunting him. But in Sarah's mind, she thought that claiming she went upstairs would sound better than just saying, I passed out because I'm a blackout drunkie the bear. Just shows you how screwed up her mind works. Instead of just saying, I passed out. That would have been easier to defend than the crazy story she came up with. And what grown adults together at home with some booze really want to play hide and seek? Really? Yeah. No, they don't. And this is, first of all, this is the theory. So a few people mentioned that they're like, she didn't go upstairs. She passed out right there. And yeah, duh. That didn't even, I mean, I'm me, the one who's carrying on with my loud mouth about what a liar she is and how stupid she is. I'm still believing some of her lies. It's amazing. It's very interesting to me because it's amazing how persuasive someone can be, even though you know they're always lying. It's just when there are so many lies, it's very hard to. But yes, I think you're right, Hyperdog67. I don't think that she went upstairs. And I think you're exactly right about the reason. Because in her mind, it does sound better. I mean, passing out on the couch is something a drunkard would do. And we all know that Sarah does not like to get drunk. And she can't get drunk because she has a son. So yes, I think we can put that. I'm going to put that in the, so we're going to eventually come up with a cohesive, as close to the truth as we think we can. And if there are reasons that you don't think that she passed out downstairs, let me know. We're gonna figure this out. So I thought this was very good, and I thought the exactly what went through her mind is exactly the reason why she did this. And I think that this is an example of how she got trapped by all of her lies, so to speak, because she wasn't going to go back on them. She's not going to, as we've discussed, even in the interrogation, she would blame the alcohol, but she wasn't drunk. I never said I was drunk. Who's lying about what? Yes, you can see I drank some. So that wasn't going to happen. And that's exactly it. She wasn't going to say I just passed out. Now we've got from Route Iris 2503. Great video. Thank you. I think George had it that night and was packing his suitcase. Remember, on the stand, she slipped and said, please don't go. Then she corrected and said, please stop doing this to me, which was total BS. We saw her videos. She still went with the abuse BS during the sentencing. I don't believe George ever abused her. Neither do I. He retaliated for sure. Sarah is where she belongs. Agreed. And yeah, and by retaliate, I think what we mean is defended himself. I I agree with that. And I do think it's possible that he was packing, but I think she started it just because I don't. I mean, listen, I don't know. It is possible that he took out the suitcase and was packing his stuff to go. But for some reason, I just don't see him, just from everything we've seen from him, I don't see him taking such an aggressive stance. I could be wrong. I mean, God knows she put him through enough all the time, and I'm sure that night as well. I also, and we'll get to one or two of the comments that mentioned that some of his things were in the suitcase. Okay, here's Doom 4067. He was finally packing to leave. That did two things. It stripped her of almost all control almost immediately, and it left her with no one else to blame for her problems. She couldn't stand for either of these things to happen. The last time she called the police, what was the first time that he was willing to tell them what she had been doing, and she caught felony charges. Now, I'm not sure about that, but we'll get into that in a second. That's why she stopped calling them. She had lost control of him and couldn't trust him to keep quiet. The theory is that he learned the reality of this situation and the pre-trial diversion classes that he had to attend because of her false accusations. She couldn't have waited 12 hours, as she claims, to remove him from the suitcase, because that's the height of rigor mortis. No human could do that under his own power. She knew that night and removed him before rigor mortis set in. Very possible. The thing is that I'm not sure about this because I believe that she caught the felony charge a few times back. Maybe one of the first times that she called them, because after that is when she kept saying on all the other times she called, "I'm not getting arrested, am I? I'm not getting arrested, am I?" Because the thing is that most people would happen when the time that she was arrested, when he was defending himself and she said he was attacking her. And most people would take that as a warning sign to not do this anymore and not call the police and not attack him. But not Sarah. I think that's part of the reason why George is dead today, because I think that infuriated her so much. And she used that. She weaponized that against him. And that's why every time the cops came, she said, "I'm not getting arrested, am I? I'm not getting arrested, am I?" Because and they were like, "Why would you be getting arrested?" She's like, "Well, because last time I defended myself." So she was basically covering her ass just in case he had any marks on him or said anything. She wanted them to know that that's what she gets for arrested for defending herself. Now, unless you're talking about a different incident, I think that, I mean, she called the cops plenty of times after that, unless there's an incident that I don't know where she caught a charge, but I'm not aware of it. I think we generally agree that however way that he got to packing, he was packing, and that did strip her of all control that she was losing almost immediately, and we know that was not going to go well. And I think that partly he did learn a lot in that class, and he maybe was coming around to realize that he was the one being abused. So it's very possible. I mean, if only he had had the time, to get out. There might be children enjoying themselves outside. Obviously, it's beyond my control. I wouldn't be having it. Apologies in advance. Next one is from Since Sliced Bread. And Since Sliced Bread says, "I think that George was packing to leave Sarah that night. Juan, his brother, mentioned in an interview that George had said he was wanting to leave Sarah. I believe Sarah flew into a narcissistic rage and beat George senseless with the ever-present baseball bat. I think Sarah put him in his own suitcase and kicked or threw the case downstairs, which resulted in a loud crashing noise the neighbors heard. I believe Sarah thought he was dead, but then he moaned her name and Sarah couldn't resist and started taking pictures and videotaping George for his future humiliation. I also think George watched and listened to George passing, only phoning Brian when it was all over just before passing out on the couch, not upstairs in her bedroom. Since Sliced Bread, I think this is all right. I think I mean, we all agree that he was packing to leave, and that's why the suitcase was out. How he came to be packing, whether it was her idea or his, really doesn't matter. It's just a small little detail. It's kind of interesting to think about. But it explains those things of his that were in the suitcase. It explains um, why the suitcase was out. And it also explains, so I agree that he was in the suitcase when it went down the stairs because it's just going to make a louder noise. And my guess would be that this night wasn't the first night that someone would have fallen down those stairs. They probably fall down those stairs every night. So those neighbors, it wouldn't have been such an unusually loud crash for them. And I feel as though, a rectangular mass will make a lot more noise than a human body going down a flight of stairs. And of course, Sin Sliced Bread also knows that she passed out right there, not upstairs, which I'm the last one to this party. I mean, yeah, you're right. I think this is an excellent overall um, synopsis of what happened. You're right. I have one question. I would like to know, Sin Sliced Bread, what you think she was calling Brian for, if she even knew why, you know. And do you think she heard him pass away and registered it as that and kept it in her mind for more than 2 seconds, or do you think she was just sitting there drunk and thrilled with herself? And um, because from what I understand about blackout drunk and what I know from being drunk, you do have a lack of true comprehension of certain things or the severity of certain things. Although, I mean, for me personally, someone dying is a real buzzkill. I would imagine it would snap me out of it, but that's me. Um, so yeah, what do you think she was calling to tell Brian or say to Brian or ask Brian? Excellent. This is excellent. Now I might, well, it doesn't matter what I might do because you're not going to know. I'm going to just do it. This is one of the very funny comments, one of the many that we got. Dabs for Dummies 7269 says, I think every time the bottle got low and there were no replacements in sight, time to call 911 so she didn't have to share. LOL. Yeah. I mean, let's gather around Sarah's priorities here. That makes sense too, and it's very funny. Okay, here's from Linda HK9er. Always a pleasure to see your videos, Miss Suma. Thank you. I agree with all theories presented. Thank you. I always have thought that she is the most vile person I've ever come across. Agreed. And I've been around. Ditto. I always had this idea, however, that she had Brian come the next morning and was hoping that he would offer to get rid of the body because for some reason she just always thinks that he will save her like she's this damsel in distress. And of course, Brian, the noble person we've come to appreciate, would never even dream of such a thing. And I think that's why she's even more bitter to him now than she ever was. I pray Brian and his son get the therapy that they need to only see her in the rearview mirror for the rest of their lives. Agreed. Hoping that he would offer to get rid of the body because, for some reason, she just always thinks he will save her, like she's this damsel in distress. And I think for good reason she thinks that. Because up until then, he did. Of course, before that, it was putting a little, $10 in her account for rude. Up until recently, saving the day was just putting $10 in her account so she could go buy some Woodbridge Chardonnay, or letting her come over and when she wanted to for whatever reason, or saving the day didn't involve a felony and a dead body. But I agree with you that she called him over in hopes that he would help in one way or another. Linda Bradford 4198 says, Brian said she was running around with George while they were still married because motherhood had become a drag. However, she still wants to be Mother of the Year. I think George took a trip down the stairs in the suitcase. I thought it when all of this started, and I still do. I thought it when all of this started too, and now I still do again. It just makes more sense. It's also the kind of thing Sarah would do, there's something extra cartoonishly evil about it to put someone in a suitcase and then push it down the stairs like the little ghoul that you are. And yes, he did say that motherhood seemed kind of, I mean, to simplify it, it was seemed kind of a drag to her. And I think that the reason for this mainly is that, it's a known fact that motherhood is not easy, and being the mother to a small child is not easy. And Sarah, for all of her carrying on about herself, Sarah doesn't like not easy, which I get. I mean, none of us love not easy unless you like a certain kind of challenge, but life always, even an easy life, gets a little too tough sometimes. And I think the difference with Sarah and, say, one of us or a slightly, or the average person is that we don't expect to meet every challenge with perfection. And so when we don't meet every challenge with perfection, we look at it as an opportunity to learn from that and move on. We can accept the fact that we are not perfect. Sarah cannot. And I think that as soon as she started to see herself as the mother that she was and not the mother that she wanted to be seen as, not even wanted to be, but wanted to be seen as, she didn't see herself as that. And that started her facade crumbling. And that's when the alcohol started. And that's when the cavorting around that bar across the street started. And she got all tied up with the men folk over there. And here we are now. You heard me. So, yeah, here's a comment that I love. First of all, I'll show it because I love the way it's presented. And also, the last sentence of this really spoke to me. Seabreeze Guyona 8699, actually it's R Seabreeze Guyona 8699, said, absolutely agree. She knocked him out with a bat, slammed him into the suitcase, and glad she is held accountable. Yes. George was not and is not the abuser. Agreed. She was jealous of George and his awesome family. And this is interesting because it's not something we hear a lot said, because there are so many other things she was pissed off about that are ridiculous and are, a given. I mean, we can all agree that there are a lot of things. She was very jealous. She was very controlling. But I agreed that she was jealous of George and his awesome family. And I think that she was jealous in general, because this is somebody who, in my opinion, when it really comes down to at her core, she hates herself. And she hates herself because she's let herself down so many times and she cannot deal with that. And I think that although you don't get any sense, or I don't and get any sense from Sarah, that she grieves her deceased family, as she puts it, they are deceased. And I don't know what her mother and father were like, but I know that from what I see in the pictures and from what I see of them, George's family was a simple, close, warm family. And the fact that they did not like Sarah was surprising to her, because Sarah also thinks she's better than everyone else. And in her slightly racist, if we want to say slightly, and delusional mind, she feels that she should walk into the Torres household and they should just be praising the gods that she's there. So this was a real wake-up call for her, and I agree. I think she was very jealous, because that kind of family is the kind of family that, if you don't have a family, or even if you don't have a family like that, that you want to be part of. I mean, and I'll probably say this a million more times, although I don't think I've said it yet. We know whose children were there to stand up for them at the pre-sentencing, and we know whose child was not. And that says a lot about a family and about Sarah Boone and George Torres. This is from Helen Someone, 6167. All scenarios are possible. However, above all else, Sarah did indeed intentionally unalive George, as evidenced in a recent text saying, hide and seek I shall, and get rid of him. She obtained the bat for this purpose. She had started to document evidence for future defense purposes. She was the abuser. Sarah is a sadistic narcissist with a superiority complex. You got that right, Helen. She thought former husband would assist in disposing of George and the case. Echoing many of your thoughts, of all your thoughts. And Allie Nabshire has an interesting take on that hide and seek I shall text, and she might be a super genius. I have always read that text as hide and seek I shall. He wasn't calling her back, so she was going to track him down. I'd still love to see her Google searches from that night/morning. Dollars to donuts, malicious intent was mentioned somewhere. Yeah, first of all, now I want donuts. Doesn't take much. And absolutely, I was hoping so much that we would get, because that malicious intent thing just seemed so contrived, and it had to come from somewhere. And I mean, there are a lot of things I'd like to know about that, her last night of freedom. I want to know if she got drunk. I'm thinking she may not have, actually, because she was with Brian. She must have been exhausted, and I don't know if she got drunk, if she would have even shown up at that uh, interview the next day. But it's possible. I mean, I don't know. But I've actually tried to Google the possible things she could have Googled to see, to to look for malicious intent. I mean, you know, no malicious. But I didn't find it. I should try that again. I'll let you know what happens there. So, Allie, I'm impressed. Not that I'm the one to judge who's a genius and who isn't, but okay, here's a beautiful mess. Here are my thoughts. I believe she pulled the suitcase out of the closet. She made a big deal of clothes, etc. during interview, but no clothes were downstairs. After convincing him to get in the suitcase and zipping it, I believe she tossed him down the steps. When at the bottom, she rolled him around a bit. I believe there are tracks in the carpet. She stopped, grabbed her phone, and began bitching. Anger grew, so she stopped recording, grabbed the bat, and beat him, and then flipped the case over, ensuring no exit, records a bit more, then says night night. Night night. Yeah, so, right. There was no clothes downstairs. Well, I think the way she said it was they were fixing to put clothes in it I mean, apparently everything took 6 months over there, but yeah, of course there was no clothes down there. And it's possible that she got him in it, convinced him to step in and zip it up. But now that we've been discussing the fact that some of his things were in it, and I hadn't thought of this because they're the kinds of things that he would bring, his paperwork and stuff. Definitely tossed him down the steps in the suitcase. And I noticed the tracks in the carpet. And I don't remember now because it's been a while since I really looked at those photographs, but the carpet is such a mess, and I think the tracks may have been there before, but we know that was the shuffling. That's the thing that I didn't talk about in my video, is that the shuffling sound that the neighbors heard, that was obviously her, pulling the suitcase with him in it, because that's the kind of shuffling that would be loud enough for them to hear, and that's shuffling. That's what that motion would be. Lynn L4WM says, yes, some of his clothes and medicine were in the suitcase. I think he was trying to leave her, too, and she really snapped. Yeah. Eric the actor says, the beautiful thing about Sarah is that for 4 years, she drove everyone crazy asking for the evidence in her case. When she was forced to represent herself, she got her precious discovery, and she clearly didn't even look at it. Because her stories about George's arrests were completely different than the story she told the cops on the body cam. And a lot of her lies are proven lies on the body cam. For instance, the night that the cops picked her up from Brian's house, one, she was clearly lying when the cops asked her what happened. But she said George kicked the door in 4 times and punched her in the ear while she was sleeping. At the trial, she changed it into barricaded the door with a dresser and a nightstand, and he squeezed through. Problem is, the cops took George into the bedroom to get his shoes and shirt before going to jail. That dresser is not moved, and neither is the nightstand. So she changed her story at some time. The body cam clearly shows a lie. Also, she said their first date, they went back to the townhouse. That's townhome. Eric, don't do that again. Townhome. They went back to the townhouse first. They were and he beat her and made her lay in the corner and not move. Sarah never lived in the townhouse without George. That's right. Although I've heard various things about that, but I don't think she did. They moved in together. That's what I thought. She still lived with Brian when she met George and couldn't afford that. Right. And that's what I think. I've just heard various things from various people, or either who lived there or, different accounts. But I think that's true. And that story she told, first of all, the body cam, all of the body cam disproves everything she says. And I did a short and then I took it down because it wasn't very good. And I thought maybe I'll go into it more deeply in a video. But as she's talking about, there were holes punched in the walls, and at some point, after she's convicted, she writes a letter, I think, or maybe in her part two of her allocution, she says something where, why didn't you take pictures of all the holes in the walls, and why didn't you take, and she says that he destroyed her son's room where she would go for safety, and he ripped the doorknobs off the doors, and that townhome is pretty pristine considering how drunk she is. The doorknobs were on the doors. There were no holes in the walls. This was not a place that had been through hell like she's talking about. Her son's room was perfectly intact. It's all nonsense. And that particular story that she gives them after she uses the car, the police as a car service back to her townhome. She says that she was in bed sleeping and he kicked the door in 4 times. So my question is, did he kick the door open, close it again, and then kick it again? How do you kick a door open 4 times? Why would you either kick the door open and you go in and you punch someone, or you don't? I mean, there's no, he would have to kick it, close it, right? And I know this cop didn't ask her anything further because he knew she was lying. He just had to do what he had to do. But, oh, God, is she detestable in that video. Yeah, you're right on all counts, in my opinion. Also, either way, first of all, I don't think that contradicting evidence matters to Sarah. She's not thinking about the evidence. The only evidence she tried to cover a little bit was the bruises on George and I guess on his fingers and stuff, because that's when she said that she poked him with the bat, because somebody got through to her, maybe Owens, that she had to account for that. Or maybe because she needed that act of, what was the term? That one particular act that would make it possible to do the BSS defense. But yeah, she generally doesn't care about evidence that she's not thinking about it, obviously, since all the doorknobs were intact and there were no holes in the walls. Kevin Quist says, "Bullseye. Thank you. You are the first I've seen to do what really happened with Sarah Boone case. You did a fantastic job. Kudos. Thank you." And there is another. There might be more than one, but there is one that I watched a while, I guess, when it came out, and I'm going to link it below because this woman, her channel is really interesting. She does a lot of Sarah Boone stuff, and I don't know. She's Scottish. She speaks with an accent, but you can understand she speaks English. And she doesn't present herself. She uses basically just footage, and I think that puts people off at first. But you should definitely check her out because her videos are really good. I mean, she does this video is long. She really goes into it, and she does the psychology of it. She's quite good. I think if you are into Sarah Boone, which clearly if you're watching this, you're into her, you'll like this. I'm going to link that below. But thank you, Kevin. That's very nice. Kevin Quist also says, it wasn't even so much that she lied about what happened. People lie, especially in awful situations. Very true. Honestly, officer, he pulled out in front of me. I wasn't speeding. It's hardwired into us. I agree. She has two huge issues. One, she can't admit that she is not a deity. And two, she is god awful at lying. Hide and seek? Really? Hell, I might have even bought the we wanted to see if he could fit. Drunk people do dumb shit. But she conflicted her last lie with her new lie, which will conflict the next lie. Absolutely correct. She just can't admit that she's, like you say, not a deity. So it's not even about can't admit that she's not right. Can't admit that she's not. This is also very good. Shin's Koala 7072. I think George would have had to get into the suitcase voluntarily. I don't think Sarah had the strength, alcohol fueled or not, to lift him and position him like he was. I've been knocked out before, but I was only unconscious for less than a minute. There's a good chance he would have woken up while she was manipulating his body since he sounded alert and aware when he was begging for his life. Shortly after. The only way that theory would work, in my view, is if she hit him over the head with a bat from behind while he was packing his clothes, and then somehow he made her fallen into the suitcase almost perfectly. I most certainly agree, however, that George's injuries occurred outside the suitcase. Off subject a little, but I also feel that when she called Brian, George was still in the suitcase. I believe that she wanted to leave him there for easy disposal with Brian's help, but enabling only went so far. That's not to say that Brian knew or was asked to participate, only that Sarah knew he wouldn't help once he insisted to call 911 immediately. So when the only thing with that is that when Brian got to, I think you're right about all of that, and the more I think about it, of course, I don't think. I mean, it would have been a real job for her to get him in that suitcase. Although I don't know, I can't imagine if he was packing. Then how's she going to convince him to get him in there? She must have, but I don't know how. That's the thing. She may have been beating him so hard that she basically said, get in. I think if we had a video of what went on there, taken by a surveillance video or something, we would really be still shocked about how cruel she is. I really do. Thank God it's very difficult for us to imagine because we're not monsters. So the only thing is, yeah, he may have been in the suitcase when she called Brian, but when Brian got there, George was out. So, and someone else had mentioned something about rigor mortis and how she probably would have had to take him out the night before, which I looked up, and he's right. That would have been the height of rigor mortis. So I don't know. I mean, I've never dealt with a corpse and in any stage. So Doom had some other comments that were very good. Doom 4067. She spent 12 hours working on a story about how Brian had done it. When he physically refused to disturb the scene, she had to call 911 and make it up on the fly. I think that's where the hide and seek came from. I think that she heard how it sounds as soon as she said it, but went with it after it came out. Yeah, she went with everything after it came out. One of her other problems. Except for it was a great day. I don't know where this is coming from. Then she brought it into, I was poking and, We've got James Booth 3460. Thanks for the videos. I love them. Good. Thank you. Sarah gaslighted him into the suitcase. Let me explain. If you notice, she liked to call the police on George after he went to sleep claiming abuse. Oh, we've noticed. You can see the police waking and arresting him numerous times on the body cam. Yep. He was always in shock and confused. That's right. We also saw her own videos of her waking him up, screaming at him, accusing him of abuse. I think he was passed out that night, and she woke him up claiming she had called the police on him and that they were on their way. She told him to hide in the suitcase. I think he got right in, and the rest is history. Very, very possible. Very possible. She planned this murder for some time, make no mistake about it. Imagine if this was him doing that to Sarah, they would not have offered him 15 years. They would have charged him with first degree murder and he would be on death row right now. Yeah, that's not necessarily wrong. And I have said before that if the trial had been run the way, if it were the opposite and the trial had been run the same way, there would be a lot of complaints about victim blaming here because there's really no proof that he ever struck her. And I've said also that you could wake this man up and start berating him and he never got angry. So, and of course, absolutely, yeah, if a Hispanic man put a white woman in a suitcase and recorded himself torturing her to death, you're damn right he'd be getting first degree. But here we are. Luckily, she saw to it that justice was served with her stupid mouth and her ugly heart. The genius Allie Nabshire says, she just calls herself Allie Nabshire. I'm calling her a genius. She said she went to bed at midnight, remembers looking at the clock. I think George was already dead when she called Brian and she knew it. She also was stating that the phone was ringing downstairs, so I believe she called Brian from downstairs with the suitcase and dead George inside. By that point she was so drunk she went upstairs and passed out, figuring Brian had heard and understood her and he would be over to help, like he always did. By the time Brian was calling her back in the morning, she had completely forgotten about everything that transpired the night before and was probably laying in her bed planning her day of abuse toward George. The shakes started coming, and he hadn't been upstairs with to serve her first drink yet, so she went downstairs, and that's when everything came flooding back to her memory. A lot of this is very plausible, and I think that, first of all, that's exactly what must have happened with the call because, of course, she said whatever she said to him. That I'd still like to know, but it probably didn't make any sense anyway because she was so drunk. She probably said it's an emergency that he got over there, and, you know, he was like, okay, whatever. Um, and she went to sleep smugly satisfied, thinking he'd show up any minute and then forgetting that immediately. I do think he probably fell asleep downstairs, though, and I think she probably fell asleep downstairs all the time. I don't know how many times they actually hit that bed. I also think that it's not possible that she was waiting for him to bring her a drink because he needed money to buy booze, and they did not. There's no. I will refuse to believe that they ever went to bed or fell asleep or passed out with any booze left in that house. If they had were given a fully stocked liquor cabinet, they still wouldn't go to sleep until it was gone. Or they both died of alcohol poisoning. I mean, there's just no way. And that's why that half bottle or whatever it was, that a Woodbridge that she claims was left over, was also a lie. But thank you, Allie Nabshire, for that and for definitely giving some insight into how that call went, and why she didn't call him back. It also kind of explains why Brian was a little bit vague about it because he may remember, and he may have remembered she called him and was like, "Oh my God, you have to come over," and he said he would, and then he hung up and went back to sleep. He may not have wanted to say that, because that probably happened all the time, and he probably, understandably so, didn't want to be, negligent in that he could have done something to. You just never know. And it's possible that they've since learned this from him, but they just haven't brought it up for also good reasons. Luminessa Von B also says Sarah thought Brian would rescue her for her son's sake. And I think most of the times that he did, it was for her son's sake. He brought her out of their house so the son could have consistency and constantly gave her money whenever she played the "I need food for son's visit" card. So why not get rid of this mess and you'll be parenting on your own. Little did she know a normal person would see that as an improvement over co-parenting with her. Yeah. I think and that's why I have so much sympathy for Brian. And, not that I think he's a white knight, but I think he is a good guy. And I think that everything he did was done for the right reason. I think that, like you said, he kept the home so the son had some stability. I think that all the things that he did for Sarah, he did because he figured, divorce can already be traumatizing for children. And so at least his mom was around. And she took advantage of that, of course. And one of the texts that we saw in some of the evidence, I don't think it was in trial, but is that she says she needs money for her son so her son can have hot water, like as if she's using cold water. Just so transparent and stupid. She's so incredibly dim-witted. This from David Price 7162 because this is just cut and dry. Totally agree, he says. Thank you. I don't know what really happened, but I know the idea of hide and seek is utter bullshit. None of her, he said you're it, so you go hide, so I hid in the shower and he tried to hide in the suitcase, makes any sense. Besides, I doubt a guy like George would play a stupid kid's game with a couple of liters of wine in his belly. Agreed. My suspicion is she just coaxed him in there and killed him. And yes, the cleaning of out the closet and donating clothes story is horse crap too. Thank you. Gwen Pigeon says, Sarah is a danger to others, but diabolical and clever enough not to be a danger to herself. Bad human. Yes, she's a danger to others and diabolical, but I'm not sure about clever, and I'm not sure about not a danger to herself either, actually. Okay, this is a comment that actually made me laugh out loud. From Tracy Yen 6937. Love your videos. Thank you. Thank you. I think Brian always had cigarettes and booze. She'd show up under the pretense of fleeing and seeing her son. We remember she's an outstanding mother. Rest in peace, George. Free Brian. This thrilled me to bits because it's exactly, first of all, you're probably right. And I mean, that makes sense, complete sense. I wish we knew if they were out of booze when she left. Probably. I mean, this is either she was punishing George or she was just like, all right, well, we're out of cigarettes and booze, but I know who's got some. Oh my gosh, she's so horrible. Thank you, Tracy Ann. This is honorable mention. This is not a theory, but know that 9503. First of all, the name. And second of all she says is love your videos. But look at this baby and tell me how cute that is that this baby loved my videos. Now we have Luminessa Von B, who is wonderful. Oh, and I'm 100% sure making him call his brother and trying to call his daughters was evidence of one of her cruelest intentions, as if she were making sure they had that last drunken call as their memory of him. She has to control everything. That she does. Luminessa Von B also says, we all know she was lying from the word go, but she was compulsive. The whole story about making George clean the apartment before she allowed him to start drinking was BS. Yes. There were ashtrays full of butts all over the townhome when CSI got there. And she also said they weren't allowed to smoke inside. I know. And Mr. J called her out on that on the stand. He was like, you're not supposed to smoke in your townhome? And she's like, that's right. But you did, right? And she was like, sometimes. Can you imagine? We would still be there if he called her out on every single thing that, you know, he wanted to and we want him to, and every single possible thing he could have. Addie is me says she was having too much fun laughing and bullying George, helpless in that suitcase. She didn't leave until he was dead, and then she called Brian and passed out. First degree. Amen. Absolutely. I mean, they could have charged her with first degree, but I understand why they didn't. T Black DZ5 Bow says, I really appreciate your thoughts about what happened to George and on that terrible night. Thank you. Particularly how you tied it in with the time of death, medical examiner's findings, and timeline of facts that we know. Thank you. What you said about her not caring if George lived is so heartbreaking and cruel. She really didn't care. The way she says he could stick two fingers out and that she would let him squirm or whatever it is. Yeah, and that's what she's saying to the first responder on scene. And countless other cruel things that showed how little he meant to her. I agree with most of your theory, except I'm not sure that even with super crack drunk strength, Sarah could physically put him in that suitcase. That's what most people think. And now, of course, I've come around because it didn't seem that plausible, but I just couldn't imagine how else he could get in there. But I'm sure you're right. but I think it's more likely that she beat him with the bat and then ordered. Yes, that's exactly what I said in the last video. That must have been it, I guess. And then ordered, threatened, cajoled him into the case. He would have done anything she said, particularly being drunk himself, beaten, disoriented, etc. Yeah. Do you think she ever ponders the truth of what she did, even though she was blackout drunk? Could she ever see what everyone else can see so clearly? Her prison text to Brian and her son are so outrageous and abusive. I really wonder if there's any hope for redemption in her future. Well, I've asked myself that question many times. And if anyone here has asked that question and come up with any potential answers, let us know. But I, it's very hard for me to say. I think she might just believe her own lies and stay staunchly outraged that no one seems to listen to her, understand her. Those texts certainly don't show someone who has the possibility of redemption. And I would say she had 4.5 years to, come around, and she just got worse and worse. So I don't know. There is a part of me that thinks that I think deep down she knows. And, I always think about the when they first show her the video in the interrogation and she says, I don't want to watch this, guys, I don't want to watch this, how long is this? Which is, first of all, balls. I mean, so disgusting. And also shows us a lot about how Sarah deals with being confronted with a bad act of hers. Immediately she wants to deflect, deny, ignore. She doesn't want to deal with it, which I get. I wouldn't want to deal with that either. But immediately, she was, guys, I don't want to watch this. I don't want to watch this, which shows us that she knew a little something, either from her past videos and I also think it's very interesting that after she saw it, she said, yeah, this looks bad. I get it. But does she? I mean, she obviously did in that moment. She saw that it looked bad, which is the other question I have, because if she saw that look bad, why didn't she think, or did she, that her other videos look bad? I'll just never understand it. Although if we go by most of her behavior and what we can tell from her thought process, it doesn't matter. The evidence does not matter to her. She will just say whatever. She wants to say that she went on a first date with George and he beat her and did all kinds of things to her and left her in a pile. I mean, and thinks that people are going to believe that? It's nonsensical. It's so insane. And not insane like criminally insane, just crazy, like, I don't know. That's the reason that I'm here and you're here and we're talking about it, because it is so hard to understand. And I've never encountered, either watching criminals or anyone like this. Thank God. So thank you, T Black DZ 5 Karen Streeter 5150 says, I came back to watch again. I agree with you about her son. Brian said that after their son was born, she started drinking, right? More, and would bring people home. She never wanted to be a mother. When she said in her interrogation video that she was an outstanding mom to her son, I wanted to throw up. There were times when she didn't pick him up from school. That's right. Her son is better off with her in prison for life, definitely. In her self-serving allocution, she never one time asked for mercy or a lighter sentence so she could spend time with her son because she was too busy spreading her gold. So true. I thought of that too. She didn't mention any of the things she should have mentioned in that allocution, I mean, so disgusting. Deb's daughter says a lot of very nice things to me, and then she says, and thank you, Deb's daughter, and then she says, I agree 100% that she had no regard for his life or health. It simply was not a factor or concern for her, which is truly sad. Her entitlement and disregard for George is astounding. I appreciate you and I'm subscribing. Rest in peace, George. Thank you. Yeah, Deb's daughter, I agree with that. It is astounding and it's incredibly sad. And it's what's sadder on a larger scale is that now we know that there are people like this who do things like this. And I guess we knew before, but she filmed this. Now we have to live with thanks a lot. These Sarah Boone video collection. The unknown texter TXTER 1873 says, I think when Sarah called Brian late night hours before the body was discovered by Sarah, I think Sarah was calling Brian because she had already unalived George and wanted to try to get Brian to dispose of George. Yeah, you're not alone. A lot of people think that. A comment from Kevin Quist. This isn't really about what he thinks happened. We did that last time, but he says, even with the video, had she eaten crow and admitted that they fought in a drunken stupor, she shoved him in the suitcase and pled to manslaughter, she may already be out of jail. But she's too effing arrogant to admit she's not perfect. And this really sums up a lot of the things that I thought throughout this whole thing, because I really feel as though, yes, the video is very damning, for sure. But this did not, had Sarah been a different person, the opposite of who she is, okay? So an intelligent, kind-hearted person who made a mistake and who would admit it. I mean, not that this was, we have to use a little bit of, poetic license here, but had she walked in there, seen this video, and I mean, imagine yourself. I would imagine that if I didn't have any recollection and they showed me this video, first of all, I would already be upset because I wouldn't be living with someone. And even if I was really kind of done with my boyfriend and we were living together and I wouldn't still, I wouldn't want him dead. I mean, so they show you a video of you doing this to someone who certainly at one point you loved and according to you still do. Can you imagine your reaction to that? That alone really sealed her fate in a way because she followed suit afterwards. But I think that most of us, I can only speak for myself. So I would, first of all, start crying. I would be so horrified and devastated that I had done this. I mean, I probably would have already because, unlike Sarah, I wouldn't be like, I don't know where this is coming from. But to watch that would be really devastating. And then afterwards, I mean, even if I didn't give a shit, I would start apologizing and saying I was drunk and saying I've got a problem. I mean, just because I'm not an idiot, But clearly she didn't care. And this brings me to another comment, which I will find in 4 hours. Just sit tight. From Karen Streeter 5150. What bothers me is that from the 911 call to the trial, she never shed one tear or showed any remorse. And this is so true, and it's unusual. Usually there's at least some crying for oneself. She didn't cry, really. I mean, the only fake crying we even saw her do was during the interrogation when she was really desperate. She was bringing out the big guns to try and, So, yes, Karen, it's quite impressive. Now we have Kendall Dat, new subscriber. Welcome. We're all new. I haven't been here this long. Have followed this case from its conception, and this video came up on my feed. Excellent analysis, and I agree with your theories. Thank you. There was no hide and seek, just as there was no CPR. Sarah is a pathological liar, so everything she says is suspect. Did they have a toxic relationship? Absolutely. However, the battered spouse and victim is George, who was pushed to the edge every day just as Brian was. Correct. Her narcissism and alcoholism controlled her. They came before everything, including her son. Absolutely. I, too, believe George was attacked with the bat and then thrown down the stairs. Sarah had all morning to come up with the story. Drunk and panicked, hide and seek in the suitcase was devised. Though nonsensical, she was now committed to that story. For 4.5 years, she stuck to her story until she was told she needed an overt act to claim battered spouse or self-defense. Suddenly, that's the act I couldn't remember in the last one. I was like, what's that act, for BSS? Overt act. Suddenly, everything changed. Amazingly, in the 11 minutes that she didn't record, George, on his last breaths in the suitcase, became combative. Now Sarah is the victim, so terrified for her life, she goes to bed. We didn't buy it, and neither did the jury. With absolutely no remorse, her allocution was all about Sarah. Poor me. Always the victim. Karma sent her to Lowell, one of the worst women's prisons in the nation, where inhumane conditions are now her life. A facility where her antics will not be tolerated. Soon Brian will be free of her, and hopefully he and their son, along with George's family, can move forward in peace. Looking forward to following more with you. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to you following me more with me too. This is very, very excellent. This is it's such a concise but thorough view of what happened and what drove it, and the past, present of this, and future. And thank you for this. So I had also said in the first video that during the 3 weeks that George was in jail, Brian had said that she was actually like met her parental custodial obligations, and so I was kind of wondering why that is, and kind of, just pontificating as I do. Sarah Bridget, 84, says, I agree about those 3 weeks. She told the police on those call outs that George called her a bad mother. That's exactly what I was thinking of, Sarah Bridget. I also wonder if it was actually George that bought the alcohol in the majority of the time with his money from work, bringing it home after his shift. Definitely. I mean, I would imagine. When he could. I mean, and I'm sure he could, certainly toward the end of the relationship, because by that time she had told him, don't send money to your kids anymore. Eve 711 says, I don't believe the I went upstairs to sleep BS. Sarah was blotto, blackout drunk, and it would be a better explanation for what transpires. But she cannot allow herself to admit any weakness. That's correct. I believe that George had enough and was going to pack and get the hell out of her demented circus. But she snapped, beat him with the bat to unconsciousness, flipped him into the suitcase, and sent him down the stairs. George is talking in a very confused fashion in her infernal video, as if he'd been popped in the noggin, poor guy. Yeah. She passed out and came to after George had died, around the same time she drunkenly called Brian, and he ignored Drunky, as so many other times. She and George may have been slight, but the amount of booze they consumed was prodigious and could lead to this disaster. Yeah, and Sarah's horrible disposition could lead to disaster under any circumstances. Yeah, thank you, Eve. Melanie McNeil, PH8YZ, says, I have never thought she went to bed. She was having too much enjoyment watching him suffer. I think she watched him until he died and passed out on the couch. Just Call Me Marita says, they got into a fight when they were upstairs and George said he was going to leave. He pulled out the suitcase and Sarah grabbed the bat and beat him. He was probably unconscious for a minute or two, giving her enough time to put him in the suitcase and zip it up. That's when she snapped the first picture at 11:03 before she took the video. Then, through her own testimony, she said that it slipped. Right. We can't trust her testimony, but she pushed it down. My guess is it didn't slip. But yes. That's when he goes down the stairs. At that point, her adrenaline was pumping so hard she went into a blackout drunken state. That's when she started filming him. During the time that she stopped recording, I believe he found a small opening that he could put his hand through. Sarah got the bat and hit his hands, which is why the autopsy found bruised fingers. That was when she filmed those last few seconds, and then I believe she went upstairs to call Brian and ask him what she should do. After he hung up on her, she sat there for a minute wondering what she should do, and then she passed out. Yeah. I think every story we could tell about, every true story about Sarah ends with, and then she passed out. Or, as she says, fell asleep. Hit the bed. Yeah, thank you. Just Call Me Marita. Thank you for that. I think it's good. I also thought that she put him in the suitcase, but I've had to go back on that because I don't think that's plausible. Geospasmic says, your version made me think about a few things, like George was actually packing to leave. For some reason, it didn't occur to me. I've always had trouble with the theory that George was unconscious when he was put in the suitcase. He's small, but he was very tightly packed. I've never tried, but I imagine it would be very hard to put someone who is dead weight in that position and get it close. Yeah, it's hard to do, I've heard, and anything with dead weight. Dabs for Dummies 7269 says, I've always thought she dared him into the suitcase after hearing they were both very competitive. Keep up the great work. Thank you. Yes, I've heard this too from more than one person. I know one was um, a neighbor of theirs that was interviewed, and not by the police, by actually someone on YouTube. That might be where you're getting it too. And someone else too. I think that was the general consensus that they kind of had that thing about them. And that had crossed my mind also. I tend to, now that I've heard theory about how she woke him up and, like, while he was still disoriented, told him to hide in the suitcase, and he did. I think that that's really a very good possibility. Although I'm not sure that means that she intended to kill him. I think she just intended to torture him a little bit, you know. But I think that that's a very good theory. MJUU2VJ said, this also has nothing to do with theories, but just a lazy gamer released the sidebars from the Boone trial. Thought you might be interested. Cheers. I had heard him talking about it, and then, of course, I immediately went to watch them. And I'm reading this just to tell you that Lazy Gamer has the whole transcript of the. I mean, it's on the court website. The transcript is available, but he reads the sidebars, and they're pretty interesting. I'll have to go over that in some way at some point. Brandy Shellman 697 says, I think he was definitely in the suitcase when she pushed him down the stairs. Then she proceeded to video her tormenting and torturing him. I think she knew he was dead way before the next day, which explains the call to Brian. Then she had all that time to clean up and concoct her ridiculous story. Then called Brian again, hoping he would help her as he always had before. Her demeanor was not that of a person just finding their boyfriend dead in a suitcase. She had hours to sober up and calm herself down. She is a big old lying liar. You got that right. And Brandy Shellman 697 also had another comment saying that rigor mortis would have set in. So I think we've established that too. Thank you, Brandy. And yeah, this tracks. I mean, I'm not sure how much time she spent awake and sobering up, but, or even, I mean, I think the story, she had probably an hour of lying there or trying to figure out, once she realized what was going on there, she came up with something. But she does seem to have anxiety. And so I'm not sure. I don't think, I've said this before, but I don't think Sarah can really spend a lot of time on her own. I think she's compulsive about that's why she's always texting and always calling and always getting drunk, It does help with, that is a form of self-medicating if you have anxiety. But yeah, I think she must have known he was dead. I just wish that I really thought, I mean, then they brought up some very important, like logistical factors in the trial, but I'm sure that they probably put together a more cohesive story there, but they just didn't share it, which is too bad because I'd like to know it. Oh, and Kendall Dad also, I had read his theory earlier. It was very good. He said that, Karma has put her in Lowell Correctional Facility, which is not known to be a very good facility. And then he adds that her antics will not be tolerated at Lowell. I wouldn't be surprised to see her move out of state for her own safety, just as it happened to Darrell Brooks and Charlie Adelson. Yes, except I've never seen a woman, I don't think, who has been moved out of a facility, because women's prisons are very different. Women tend to, they don't have the same code of ethics where, like, if you've committed one kind of crime, your days are numbered there. They tend to stick together, I think, because women are already, minorities, and so they have that sisterhood, and somehow it just doesn't play out that way. It's just, I've never known of a female inmate to have to be moved, but if anyone knows of one or two or more, let me know. Thank you, Kendall Dad. Since Sliced Bread 7422 follows up and says, hey there, thank you very much for reading my comment regarding that night. Thank you for the comment. To answer your question, I think Sarah drunkenly dialed because I was asking, what do you think she said to Brian when she called him? Drunkenly dialed Brian's number that night to boast about George's predicament. Brian confirmed that she often called him late at night and he'd learned to ignore her. This really ticked Sarah off, though, because she reframed it in her interview the next day as the boy crying wolf. Sarah was the boy crying wolf. She had phoned Brian so many times previously, demanding his help, that Brian had learned to switch off and offer her a deaf ear. This time, however, she really needed his help, but Brian ignored her for her umpteenth cry of wolf. And you know that's what Sarah's like. She's not one to let things go. You got that right. So she repeated this phrase over and over again to the scoundrel detectives, probably giving herself an A+ for using her pain so creatively. Maybe, although I think she probably used her pain creatively all the time and always got an A+, and that's where she got all the A's from herself. It's very possible. I mean, she didn't say cry wolf. She said something else. She said it slightly incorrectly. She said called wolf. It's a very interesting take on it, and and I think I wrote back in the comments and said this, that if you listen to all of the things that Sarah says about literally everyone, judge, lawyers, ex former husband, George, everyone who she doesn't like, what she describes is herself to a T. To a T. All of the lawyers are lying, none of them are listening to her. Brian is controlling and mean, and all those things. She used the word mean a lot too. It's like, you came up with fractious. You can't come up with something other than mean. And she also just wants people to be nice to her, which is very interesting, all things considered. I also just want to give a special shout out to Linda HK9R. Olive Oil 608 says, I just want to know what's what and how many. Olive oil, don't we all? JM the composer says, why did Sarah flip the suitcase? It's because she was using the bat to hit the suitcase with George inside. Except that the suitcase has a rigid frame, so she needed to flip it in order to inflict maximum punishment. I agree. Why was the suitcase upside down to begin with? That's how it came to rest after she pushed it down the staircase with George inside. Definitely. Robisis1 or Robisis1. What if she told him to get out of her house? When he attempted to follow her orders, she said, please don't go. He kept packing, and she brought the bat into play. I'm right here with you. I have dealt with some truly evil people during my life. I'm sorry. But everything about her hits me in such a way that I'm not ready to let this go either. Life was not enough, and I pray for Brian and his son in the ongoing family court case. I literally think about George all the time, and I never knew the guy. I cannot fathom what his family is going through because I, as a complete stranger, don't have the closure yet. I'm glad you're still doing this. I promise it helps a lot of us. Good. I'm glad. And yeah, I think about George a lot too. I had sent, when I first saw the interrogation, I sent it to my best friend to watch, because if there's something that, what we call it is, we can't be alone with this, we share it so that we're not alone with it. And she's into true crime too, but she hadn't heard about this case. And at this time, we weren't watching that much YouTube. I was just getting started and really basically only watching YouTube. And she, of course, then also became completely obsessed with this. We watched the trial together. We really were like, we had planned to watch the trial the week before we were going to Puerto Rico. But of course, because of the hurricane, that Owens called a divine intervention. Only Owens would call a potentially deadly storm divine intervention, but it was late. So we were on the beach in Puerto Rico watching the trial as we were. And I was thinking about George then too, because I was on the beach in Puerto Rico. So I feel you. She and I both are. Sarah is part of our everyday vernacular. We have certain, all of our like bestie lingo has been infused by her and all of her nonsense and what's what and how many. And if you don't mind, please. So, yeah, we have to. That's why it does help to find humor, and she's a humorous character, unbeknownst to her. Jesse B says, if she intentionally killed him, why? I have so many whys. Yeah, we all have a lot of whys, Jesse B. But I mean, I personally don't think she intentionally killed him. I just don't. First of all, I don't think she'd want him gone because she was really enjoying herself with him. And yeah, I just don't see that. But so I wouldn't know the answer to that because I don't know the answer to things that I do believe are true. You're welcome. KPM1166, who has a very cute picture of a doggy here. Hi. I think she passed out on the couch too. I think you're right. I'd like to know why he had medication in his syringe. I think he was packing to leave based on the items in the suitcase, or she was throwing his stuff in it, screaming at him to get out. She beat him while he was in the suitcase. I pray he was gone by the time she did that. Me too. And as I read this, and I think I wrote you back and with the answer I'm about to give, but now that I'm thinking about it, I always said that he was packing. I just think that she started it. But if she was packing for him, she wouldn't have put his documents in there. And we know that because she'd keep those to hold over him. And the medication in the syringe was a medication that I don't remember the name now, but it's a medication that's given to alcoholics during the recovery process. It helps to kind of levels you out when you're recovering, when you're detoxing, basically, I guess, or it helps you if you're wanting to drink. It helps you from breaking your sobriety, I believe. I don't know that many details about how it works exactly, but I know that's what it's for. Crystal Lachance 657. I get pissed when people in the comments say that George was an awful person and abuser. I don't believe he abused her even one time. I don't either. She was the abuser 100%. She abused Brian too and would then tell their marriage counselor that Brian abused her as well. I know. That was the final straw for Brian, yeah. And he had a lot of straws there. I mean, wow. She was running their marital home, as she calls it, with their son in it, like it was a frat house or a whorehouse. I don't even know. Just saying. She continues to abuse Brian to this day, yes. She's so vile and disgusting. Her fake religious crap is vomit-inducing too. Amen. Because, I mean, that I don't like that, obviously. I'm not a very religious person, but I respect people who have a lot of faith, and there are a lot of good religious people in this world. And when people do shit like this, it really enrages me. I mean, also, just disgusting. She's just a rotten person to her core. She really is. Can't wait till she gets smoked in family court and her appeals get denied. Me too. There are also people who do this with religion. They're always hypocrites. And that's probably my least favorite characteristic, is a hypocrite. And someone who's judgmental, which is kind of the same thing. MJ-UU2VJ says, outstanding video again. Thank you. I think she knocked George out upstairs with a bat, possibly, as you say, he finally had enough. Shoved him into the suitcase. She also took a photo that appears to be in a different location than the before videos. Then used her crack strength to get the suitcase downstairs, fumbling at the top of the stairs. Rest in peace, George. Thanks for posting your thoughts. Thank you for posting your thoughts. Yeah, I'm not sure if she would be able to get him into the suitcase, but she definitely pushed him down the stairs in the suitcase, and you know the rest. Helen Someone 6167 says, and a few people have made this comment, I don't know if I'll come across those as well, but that she wasn't a good mother because she has been talked to by CPS after she posted a pic of her son in a suitcase. She planned it and she knew full well the dangers. So, yes, that picture was posted. I think it was her and Brian. They were playing around with their son because they were going on vacation. CPS, this is what's interesting is that somebody who saw it on Facebook contacted CPS, which is Child Protective Services, for those who use a different term for that. And I thought, someone somewhere must hate her because that's not the kind of thing, maybe it is, but I've never heard of that. That's not generally done. I don't know. And it turned out to be nothing, which also means CPS is not perfect, to put it nicely. But this was, Brian was involved in this, so that's how we know that it wasn't sinister. But certainly it makes it, they didn't have to bring it out, but I'm sure they would have if she was claiming that she didn't know that this could kill someone, because she knew. She'd get in trouble for that. And also she's a terrible mother, but that's not why. We have more examples of how terrible a mother she is just from the body cam and her letters. Karen Neasley 288 says, even just her statement to the 911 call puts in second-degree murder. I put my boyfriend in the suitcase. We were playing. I fell asleep. Then I woke up. He was dead in the suitcase. Yeah. Oh, here's Mystery 207 also says she had Scud called for her putting her son in a suitcase. I believe they have video or photo. Yeah. Teresa Feeney 2756. There was no hide and seek. The suitcase was always in the closet, and I think Sarah planned the attack. I don't think she planned the outcome. Me neither. Me too, and me neither. You could tell she was guilty because of the way she gave way too much information to the 911 dispatch. We all know Sarah didn't perform CPR on George either. That's right. Well, Sarah is just where she belongs, in prison for the remainder of her life. We will never stop hearing from her either because there will always be something she's going to complain about. Right. Hopefully she'll stop getting a platform for it because we've probably heard her complain enough. Who gives a shit about what she has to complain about? She should have plenty of complaints. She deserves it. And she'd have them anyway. Tracy Murgatroyd 632 says, thanks for another excellent analysis. You're welcome. There was a child safety gate at the bottom of the stairs for her dogs. I think the crash that shook the wall was poor George hitting it after being jettisoned down the stairs in that suitcase. How she got him into it, I really don't know. I do think it would be very difficult to manhandle an unconscious person into a suitcase. Also, he seemed to be aware of his predicament during the snuff movie, so maybe Sarah ordered a drunken George to get into it from her bully pulpit upstairs, and he obeyed. Guess we'll never know for sure, as Miss 911 P. Shorts on Fire Boone isn't ever going to come clean. That's right. What you said about her transferring her abuse to her son is absolutely true and documented from her jail text messages. That's right. To him, I hope the family court helps Brian to sever all ties from that dreadful woman futuristically. I hope so too, and I think they will, because I don't know exactly what the family court has access to and what they look at, but if they look at her allocution or any of these texts to Brian and her son, which I'm sure Brian has a folder full of, she's never getting anything. And she's too stupid to know it. Thank God. So thank you, Tracy. This was excellent. Linda McMahon, 2471. My theory is the trigger for all of this was when George lost his jobs, therefore no money for booze. Brian probably didn't give her money whenever she asked, so she took her anger out on George. So when George had enough, he started packing his suitcase and she flipped out and sacked him in the head with the bat. Inside the suitcase was medication, a tie, a few of George's shirts. Inside the suitcase was medication, a tie, a few of George's shirts, court papers. So he was packing. She knocked him out and stuffed him in there and threw him down the stairs, where he came to, as she started taunting him. She passed out on the couch. If you notice from the body cam, the next morning the bed was made. She woke up at some point and realized he was still in there dead and called Brian to dispose of the body. He wouldn't answer. Also, there was a phone call to Brian he refused to discuss, so that's the call, Sarah asked him to dump the suitcase, but Brian said no. He has always been the cleanup guy. So Brian told her to call 911 multiple times. She went out back and drank more booze. She didn't have more booze. That's the only thing I disagree with. I don't think there was no booze in the house. No booze left. I think she drank she drank a Dr. Pepper. She would have been drinking booze had she had any. Drank some booze and smoked, thinking of her plan, and staged the scene to look innocent. The rest is history. Of course, no CPR, because how dare he leave her? So she was mad at him. No remorse. My 2 cents. Yeah, right. And also, how dare he do this anyway? Because this has been a huge pain in her ass, you know? And obviously, it's not her fault because no malicious. Olive Oil 608 says, I have been thinking about this video. Sarah is so wicked. If we knew the real truth of what happened, we wouldn't sleep. That is very true, in my opinion. There's a special place in hell for her. Like her very own jail table that was just hers, she will have her own pit. Just ugh times 200. Yeah, I know. That's why I say, like, if we knew what actually happened, we saw what actually happened there, we would not believe it. And she would have still insisted on going to court and taking the stand and pleading innocent and insisting she's innocent. Oh, Christiana 5 says, also, I haven't looked recently, but I recall a news article recalling the possible CPS visit in regard to using a suitcase previously to put her young son in it. Yes. Oh, also, so what I was going to say about the safety gates is I don't think those safety gates were up most of the time, if ever, really. You know, Sarah is full of it, as we know, and I'm just not sure that those were really. I think the suitcase crashing into the wall would have done enough, or they were there and not closed. Maybe they were closed. I don't know, but that could have also added to the noise for sure. Granny Smith 123 says Brian literally transferred money to Sarah's account the Sunday they went to Publix for the wine. That's right. She's just a mean, narcissistic barfly. And I love that because it's just a simple way of summing her up in a very lowbrow way, which she would hate. It's true, it's just a mean, narcissistic barfly, which is like, ugh, you know. I mean, mean barflies are bad enough. Barfly, okay, do you. But mean narcissistic barfly is like, ugh. Mean narcissistic anything is ugh, but mean narcissistic barfly means you're also good and drunk. I'm also not sure if the trigger was George losing his job, although, listen, I think everything triggered her. I think that two things are true. Well, many things are true and many things are not, but with Sarah, certainly two conflicting things can be true at the same time. I don't think Sarah liked George working for obvious reasons because he wasn't in her sight. I have a theory that's based on nothing, that when Sarah and George, well, it's based on common sense, I guess, and what I know of people in this situation, but when they met, George had a full-time job at Ace Hardware, and it became part-time because he wasn't showing up that much. And it seems to me that his manager really liked him and she kind of knew what was going on there. And I think that they switched him to part-time so that he could keep his job and, and it's true. The store closed, which is such a terrible blow, because like I said, now he's got a record. So it's going to be much harder for him to find a job and just and get to a job, just everything. But Sarah would have been angry at both things. First of all, she was never going to let him get a job again. That's a given. She was too controlling to ever let him leave the house again. And she would also complain because they wouldn't have money. I mean, this was not going to end well no matter what, for sure. Eventually, he would have gotten out. I just wish he had been a little bit more careful about it and had been able to do it. I love Barbara King 70692 because she's very to the point. She beat him with the baseball bat, then locked him in a suitcase and went to bed. The end. Given her size and condition of being very drunk, I feel like she must have got must have got him to cooperate somehow. Yeah, that's what we feel like. And I think at this point, it might be unanimous. No one's really fighting that. I'm the only one who thought she put him in there. But yeah, but we don't know how. Although I still stick very possible. And then of course there's the possible could have been that could have she could have turned it into a game. But my guess is that by then things may have been a little ugly already. So she either threatened him to beat him into it or woke him up and said, "Get in the suitcase real fast." Although, yeah, I don't know. Maybe she knocked him unconscious, then woke him up and did that. Oh, fuck knows. She's so crazy. Dana Lynn says, I agree 100% that it was Sarah who initiated the suitcase activity. I think she pulled out the suitcase herself and ordered him to start packing and get out of my effing life. Yeah. To be to be read in Sarah Boone's shrill, disgusting, drunken voice. Yeah, I can't. I'm not sure if I can do that. I mean, maybe she did then start packing, and maybe he did then start packing, and she crept up behind him, beat him with the bat, whacked him several times, and maneuvered his battered body into the suitcase. She definitely crept up and beat him with the bat. That we know. And yeah, I think she brought out the suitcase and told him to start packing too. She's always telling him to get out of her life, and he's always saying, "I love you," and she's I don't love you and never where it's over, she loves that. But this time she got a rude awakening when he was like, you know what, good idea. So, and that's the price he paid with his life. Okay, so I hope I didn't miss any, but there might be some more also after this. I don't know. I tried to get them all in here because I'm trying to make this a nice long video for you because you're my people and I want to give my people what they want. It'll probably take about 6 weeks to upload into YouTube, so I'll see you next year. Thank you for watching, and thank you for contributing, and thank you for everything, and I will see you very soon. Bye.